Well, despite complaints of low power generation and gas shortages, the electricity distribution companies have managed to increase their monthly revenue from January to March 2024. The revenue rose from 95 billion naira to 100 billion naira. This rise in revenue occurred at a time when the country experienced a significant drop in power supply. Now, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission reported that in February, 97 billion naira revenue was generated. Despite the challenges, the distribution companies achieved an 80% billing efficiency in January, and the rise in revenue can be attributed to an increase in tariffs. This morning, joining me from Ogun State, Nigeria, is Professor Yemi Oke, Energy Electricity Law, University of Lagos. Thank you so much, Professor Oke, for joining us on the show.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Professor Oke, tell us, is there a justification for the hike in tariff that gave birth to an increase in revenue? We're talking about 5 billion naira for discos, despite a significant drop in power supply during January till March 2024.
Well, you are bringing me back to my whole argument on tariff. Tariff is a question of a number of things. One, how much is spent to generate a kilowatt, and how much is that to be sold per kilowatt hour? How many Nigerians are metered? What is the quantum of the overall electricity that we generate in Nigeria as a country? The challenge is that we've not been generating enough. So on the cost per unit of what is generated is quite huge and expensive. We were generating about 4,000 thereabout before privatization, so we're still oscillating around 4,000, 4,005 at most. Then you are to spread your costs, including cost of production, staff, management expenses, and others, on the less than 5,000 or 4,000 megawatt that is generated. So you factor in, that goes into the cost per unit. If we're able to generate more, then we can spread the cost. That's the first challenge. The discos who bought those entities who don't have the financial wherewithal to expand the infrastructure. So there's a lot of transmission losses. There's a lot of collection losses. And a huge chunk of what is generated and transmitted and distributed is bypassed by some scrupulous Nigerians and business entities. So there's a challenge as to what we have. And the discourse are hugely exposed in terms of that. What the federal government did, which I subscribe to, was to pull back the amount of subsidy in the power sector so that the discos and other entities can sit back and figure out how they will get better efficient in terms of their collection and other losses. And they also need to factor in that government is no longer subsidizing to this extent. Now, what is the actual true value of what we are generating and distributing? Yeah, how much can we afford to give to Nigerian consumers? Justifiably, yeah, they have to increase the tariff. But then Nigerians should not, and definitely not be paying for darkness. That is where my own grounds, of course, lies. So Nigerians cannot control their pattern of consumption. So you are not going to increase tariff and not give me the right of choice, the option to determine whether I want to consume 2 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours of electricity. So, and the consumers will get prudent with what they consume, and they can get metered and pay appropriately for what they consume. And they may decide to put themselves in darkness for a few hours based on what they can afford. But the government should not continue to behave like a reckless Father Christmas, as it were, giving money out on generation. as against consumption because the law is there. So that was why I said government had justifiably pulled back the extent to which they've been subsidizing the power sector because Nigerians are not actually getting value for their money, which is being used to subsidize. They've been subsidizing waste.
Okay, so that's
allow them to get
Professor K.
Yes, please.
Yes, Professor, okay, that seems to be the bone of contention for many Nigerians. The fact that Nigerians do not really get value for what they pay for, and now we now have a hike in tariff. Now, you mentioned a couple of things. You talked about the deficits in the number of houses being metered in Nigeria. You talked about the GenCos not having enough capacity to generate power and the lack of investments in that particular sector. And some people feel, most especially stakeholders feel, that instead of removing subsidy from the sector and increasing the tariff, why is it that the government couldn't have, in the initial stage, gone about trying to increase the capacity, most especially by seeing how to attract investment into that sector? And when you have enough funds and facilities to move around, then you can now begin to remove subsidy and probably tinker with the issue around increasing the tariff. Because at the end of the day, it is Nigerians who pay more and get less in terms of value. And at the end of the day, it still does not solve the perennial challenges in the power sector.
The way to go about it is this. One, I'm not expecting government to fund the power sector. It's not done anywhere in the world. The government only needs to put in place an enabling environment for prudent investors to come on board and invest in Nigeria's power sector. That's one. Government in this circumstance, in this instance, means federal government and the state government. So we shouldn't extricate the state government because power is not, it's always been a concurrent thing anyway, just that the law has just been changed so that state governments can also license for off-grid and on-grid generation, transmission, and distribution. So government, federal and state, will need to put on their thinking cap to put in place strategies to attract investors. I agree with you for that extent. Two, I also agree that Nigerians will need to start to look at alternatives. We're already looking at options and alternatives to stable electricity supply we've been having. I frown at a situation in which Nigerians will be forced to pay for darkness. That has never been acceptable to me. If you're going to give me one stable power of electricity, let me know the cost. If I'm going to consume 1 hour or 2 hours, let me know what I'm paying for, and let me get value for money. That's on the side of Nigerians. Also on the side of our Commonwealth, Nigeria's resources have been used to subsidize power wastefully. And I say government should put that back and channel the resources. So we need to get efficient with what we do in the power sector. And I've been saying this for more than 15 years. All is not well with the power sector. I've said more than enough. And short of repeating myself, there's nothing I need to say as far as the challenges of the power sector is concerned that I've not said. But definitely, increase in tariff will mean more money in the pockets of the business. To do what? Of course, to pay their debt and also service their infrastructure. It doesn't translate to automatic profitability for them because they are servicing their debt, which they got years back, in dollars at the rate of 116 to $1. And they still have a number of challenges. The equipment they're going to use to expand their structure is denominated in dollars. And there's no way they can charge at parity in dollar. An average Nigerian will not definitely be able to afford that because meaning that if they go to charge, now will be charging something in the region of 1,004 equivalent. It's not doable. So the money, the increase in revenue doesn't really translate into success for them because most of them, 30% of them are still insolvent.
Okay, so let's do a bit of comparison now and look at it from the angle of these discos. Now, according to what we know, about a disco earned the highest revenue of about 10 billion naira, while other discos like Yola had about 1.5 billion naira, which means that what they've been able to generate during the course of the period under review, of course, is different. We see that large gap in between. Now, I'd like to find out what factors you would attribute these differences to, and probably if there anything that you think that these companies can do to improve efficiency in terms of power generation without inadvertently affecting or tearing to the purse of Nigerians or consumers, as the case is.
So we need to say something. When you look at the net value of earnings of a particular disco, we need to advert our mind to the fact that it's not money to disco or the discos alone. If, for instance, we say Ibadan generated 10 billion naira, the 10 billion naira are going to pay the generation companies to supply the electricity. They're going to pay the transmission company of Nigeria, because essentially for gas feedstock and other components. So the money is going to be divided among the players and other agencies involved. So the whole of 10 billion naira is not money that goes directly to a particular disco and it remains in the pocket of the disco. That's what it is done.
Okay.
There's a certain formula. So because you don't see the gencos, those who actually generated the electricity, the power that is being distributed, you don't see them bring bills to you. The transmission power lines are also not going to bring their bills to you. The regulator will also not bring bills to an average home. So the money, like the discos are like a recovery agent for the players in the value chain. But Nigerians don't know that. So meaning more revenue for the gencos to pay their debts, for TCN to continue to maintain the transmission infrastructure, and for discos also to pay for the services rendered, among others. Because there has been a huge shortfall in the power sector, cash liquidity. So now making more money for them to be able to discharge their respective obligations and pay their debt. There is huge debt overhangs in the value chain on all of them. So that's the structure. So it doesn't mean more money for the discos.
Okay.
Well, just that it brings down the level of illiquidity in the system.
Okay.
Try to reduce the level of insolvency in the system, which is really scary.
Professor Yemioke, sadly, the issue around what we are experiencing now as regards industrial action, affordability investments, social unrest, the destruction of facilities and all that will also continue to plague this sector. And a lot of things will need to be done by the Nigerian government if this issue is to be resolved. We are going to draw curtains on this conversation, Professor Yemioke, today, Energy, Electricity Law, University of Lagos, but then we appreciate your profound contribution. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and have a lovely day.